A small municipal courtroom hums under old lights. People sit on worn benches, envelopes and tickets in their hands, waiting for their names. The rear door opens. A man in a dark, pressed suit walks in as if he is late to a meeting he runs, not to a hearing he must attend. At the defense table, he drops a leather folder. The smack on wood turns a few heads. Loose pages slide out and stay where they land. His eyes travel the room, the state seal above the bench, the camera in the corner. The faces turned his way. He looks like someone checking a room he once inspected, not like a man answering for a ticket. "How much longer?" he asks the clerk. "I've been sitting out there 40 minutes. Do you understand who you've got waiting?" The clerk, gray at the temples, straightens a small stack of files. "Sir, everyone's case is called in order," she says. "The judge will call you when it's your turn." He turns slightly toward the benches, as if expecting someone to speak up for him. In the second row, a man in a work jacket leans to his neighbor. "That's Drayton," he whispers. "State government. If he came to your town, somebody got fired." On his way back to the table, the man, Mark Drayton, cuts in front of an older gentleman with a cane and bumps the cane with his knee. The gentleman grabs the bench to steady himself. Mark does not turn around. "Next matter," the clerk calls. "Parking violation, municipal building, restricted government zone. Mark Drayton." Mark rises with the smooth motion of someone used to rooms where other people stand when he arrives. He steps to the microphone without glancing at the screen that shows his car in a space marked "Official Vehicles Only." On the bench, Judge Caprio flips through a thin file. Citation, date, photograph, routine on paper. Beside the file lies a white envelope from the state, delivered that morning and already opened. The name inside matches the one on the ticket. "Good morning, Mr. Drayton," the judge says, calm, almost kindly. "Is that your vehicle in the photograph on the screen?" Mark gives the monitor the briefest glance. "Judge, let's make this quick, all right?" he says, with a small, practiced smile. "I've got a meeting up at the Capitol in 40 minutes. I can't be wasting time on something this minor." A man near the aisle raises his eyebrows. Someone in the back folds their arms. It is the sound of a person used to deciding what matters. Judge Caprio leans back slightly and folds his hands. "We don't rush cases here, Mr. Drayton," he replies, gentle but firm. "This court will take the time it needs." A muscle jumps along Mark's jaw. His fingers close around the edge of the folder, knuckles whitening and then easing. For the first time that morning, nothing in the room moves on his schedule. The camera light in the corner keeps blinking. The envelope, under the judge's hand, stays still. And what looks like a simple parking ticket has already begun, for everyone watching, to feel like the first step into a larger story. Mark stands rigidly at the podium, the weight of his own reputation hanging around him like an ill-fitting overcoat. The courtroom watches him with the kind of curiosity reserved for someone who used to be important and still behaves as if he is. Judge Caprio studies him for a moment before asking, "State your name for the record." Mark straightens a fraction. "Mark Drayton, former Deputy Director of Government Compliance." There's a quiet reaction from the benches, recognition mixed with unease. Older residents exchange looks that say, "We remember this one." For 2 decades, Mark had been the man who combed through municipal budgets, issuing warnings that could send small-town officials into panic. He had a reputation for dissecting technicalities with a surgeon's precision and a prosecutor's coldness. In his world, rules existed to discipline the people below him, never to restrain him. Now he clears his throat and slides 3 thick binders onto the table. Each lands with a dull thud. "These documents," he begins, tapping the top binder, "outline the procedural irregularities in the issuance of my citation. I've marked specific sections of state code." The judge raises a hand gently. "Mr. Drayton, this is a parking matter. I won't need binders." Mark blinks. 1 second. 2. It's the first visible crack in the facade. He spent years forcing others to justify every comma in their paperwork. And now, someone, this soft-spoken judge in a small Rhode Island courtroom, won't even open the files he brought as armor. A woman in the second row whispers to her husband, "That man once reviewed our grant application. He refused it because we stapled the form instead of using a paperclip." Mark shifts his weight. He hears it. He pretends he doesn't. Judge Caprio continues, "Why did you bring all of this?" "Because," Mark says sharply, "I know how these systems work, and I'm not going to let a clerk with a handheld scanner decide I'm in the wrong." His voice carries a note that hasn't appeared until now. Defensiveness, not anger, not authority. Something thinner, frayed at the edges. The judge's eyes narrow slightly. "Let's keep it respectful." Mark forces a breath out through his nose. "Fine." Caprio returns to the simplest question in the world. "Is the vehicle in the photograph yours?" The moment hangs there. Mark's eyelid twitches, just enough for the front row to notice. He nods, but the nod doesn't match his tone when he says, "Yes." Obviously, it's mine. The judge doesn't react. He watches him the way a doctor watches a patient answer a question that reveals far more than the words themselves. "Mr. Drayton," he says, "you were informed last year that your government parking privileges were revoked when you left office, correct?" Mark stiffens. The room senses the shift. "My departure," he replies carefully, "was administrative. Politics. Nothing to do with my conduct." He speaks as if reciting testimony. Clean, precise, rehearsed. Except the end of the sentence trails just a little too softly. He knows everyone in the room has heard about the investigation that cost him his career. The one that never ended in charges, but left a stain that wouldn't wash off. "I spent my life enforcing accountability," he adds, with a thin edge of pride. That tends to make enemies. In the back of the courtroom, an elderly woman shakes her head. "Enemies," she mutters. "He made people afraid." Mark places a hand on the top binder and presses down, the way someone presses on a bruise to see if it still hurts. He tries to reclaim the room with his posture, his tone, his size. But something about the air has changed. He feels it too. Judge Caprio tilts his head. "You seem very prepared for a minor violation, Mr. Drayton." Mark answers without thinking, "I'm prepared for anything." But the response lands wrong. Too quick, too defensive, too revealing. And the judge hears it. Everyone hears it. There is something in this man that does not belong to a simple parking dispute. Something unresolved. Something simmering beneath the tailored suit and polished shoes. The judge gently closes the file. "We'll proceed," he says. Yet, in the pause that follows, one truth settles over the courtroom like dust. This hearing isn't about asphalt lines or signage. It's about a man who once held power, and the uneasy shadow he still casts. Judge Caprio folds his hands on the bench, his posture easy, but his gaze sharply focused. Mark senses the shift before a word is spoken. Something in the judge's silence seems to press against him harder than any accusation. "Mr. Drayton," the judge begins, "help me understand something. Your state parking credentials were deactivated 14 months ago. Why were you still using that restricted zone?" A faint tremor runs through Mark's fingers. He tries to hide it by adjusting the microphone. I wasn't aware the status changed," he says. The answer is too quick, too rehearsed. Caprio reaches for the envelope he glimpsed earlier, the one delivered that morning. He opens it with unhurried movements, as though he has all the time in the world. He lifts a page, glances at it, and sets it beside the citation. "Interesting," he says softly. "Because according to this notice, the person who requested that zone be redesignated was you." The courtroom inhales as one. On the page is a signature that matches the one on Mark's citation appeal. His own neat, slanted handwriting, authorizing the conversion of the old staff access area into a strictly regulated government-only zone. He wrote it, he enforced it, and he violated it. For the first time, Mark's confidence fractures. His jaw loosens, his eyes flick downward, then away, searching for a foothold. "That memo," he stammers, "is outdated. It's irrelevant to—" "Is it?" the judge asks quietly. "It shows knowledge. Knowledge you just denied." A murmur stirs across the benches. Not loud, just the rustling of people who suddenly understand more than they're supposed to. Mark's breath shortens. His facade shifts from authority to agitation, and the transition is painfully visible. He leans closer to the microphone. "Judge, you're blowing this out of proportion. We're talking about one space, one incident." Caprio doesn't respond immediately. He watches him instead, as if waiting to see whether the truth will rise on its own. A chair creaks in the back row. A man in a city-issued jacket stands reluctantly. He's older, with wind-burned cheeks and a badge clipped to his pocket. "Your Honor, may I speak?" he asks. Mark wheels around. "Sit down. This isn't your place." The man doesn't sit. His voice is steady, almost apologetic. "Sir, he yelled at me twice last month. Told me I didn't understand authority when I asked him to move his car. Said the rules didn't apply to him." Mark's face reddens. "You're misrepresenting." The judge lifts a hand, cutting through the noise. "Mr. Drayton, he has the right to be heard." The room falls still again. The parking officer lowers his gaze. "I've worked this job 26 years. Folks get upset, sure. But this felt different. Like he wanted us to remember who he used to be." That lands harder than anything so far. Mark's throat bobs in a tight swallow. His voice comes out sharper than he intends. "You don't get to define me. You don't know what I've dealt with." "No," the officer replies. "But I know when someone's trying to scare people." A hush blankets the courtroom. Mark's shoulders tense, as though he's bracing for impact. His fingers grip the wooden podium so hard the veins rise along the backs of his hands. The room sees him now, not as a commanding figure, but as a man cornered by his own past. Judge Caprio finally speaks, not harshly, not with anger, just with an evenness that carries more weight than raised voices ever could. "We're not discussing who you were, Mr. Drayton," he says. "We're examining what you chose to do now." The words strike with the precision of a gavel. A thin sheen of sweat forms across Mark's brow. His breathing grows audible, betraying nerves he can no longer conceal. The courtroom feels smaller, as though the walls have drawn in. And for the first time since he walked into the room, his confidence doesn't just waver. It slips, enough that everyone watching can feel the shift. This isn't a battle about a parking space anymore. It's a confrontation with truth. And Mark is losing ground. A dense quiet settles over the courtroom, as if the walls themselves are waiting for what comes next. Mark stands rigid, his breath tight and shallow, his confidence replaced by something rawer, fear disguised as anger. Judge Caprio leans forward, elbows resting lightly on the bench. His voice is steady, almost gentle, but every word lands with the accuracy of a hammer. "Mr. Drayton, before we continue, I want to make sure you understand the direction this hearing is taking. My next question may change the scope of this case entirely." The statement hangs in the air. Mark freezes. His pupils narrow, then widen, as though trying to read the judge's intent. "What question?" he demands, attempting to recover ground. "What are you implying?" Caprio doesn't answer immediately. Instead, he picks up the morning envelope, the same one that caught his attention before the hearing began. He slides a document from it, and lays it flat where everyone can see. The seal of the state agency glints under the fluorescent lights. "This," the judge says, tapping the paper, "is a report filed by municipal enforcement officers. It alleges that you've been presenting outdated identification, credentials that should have been turned in when you left office." A ripple of unease spreads through the benches. Mark's face tightens. "That's nonsense. I never—" The judge continues calmly. "The report also states you intervened multiple times to block parking enforcement around the government complex." "I was clarifying procedures," Mark snaps. "They don't understand the regulations." Someone near the back mutters, "He can't stand not being in charge?" The judge raises a hand, not to silence the crowd, but to signal he is far from finished. "This isn't a criminal charge," he clarifies, "and I'm not treating it as one. But it paints a picture, a pattern, one that speaks to behavior, not paperwork." Mark's nostrils flare. "I gave 30 years to this state." 30? And now you're lecturing me based on complaints from people who never understood the responsibilities I carried? There's an electric shift in the room, the kind of tension older Americans recognize, authority melting into defensiveness. Caprio's gaze stays steady. "Mr. Drayton, when someone insists everyone else is wrong and only they see things clearly, it usually means something inside them is deeply unsettled." Mark opens his mouth, but no sound comes out. Then, from the far corner, a movement. A woman rises, a quiet, hesitant motion. She's in her early 50s, wearing a simple blouse and carrying a worn handbag. Her hands tremble slightly as she steps into the aisle. The judge looks at her with measured curiosity. "Ma'am, can I help you?" She swallows hard. I used to work with Mr. Drayton." Mark whips around to face her, eyes blazing. "No, sit down. You don't belong in this." Her voice wavers, but holds steady enough to carry. "I do. Because I know who he becomes when he thinks no one can question him." A murmur drifts through the room. She continues. "I was his assistant for 7 years. I saw him override procedures, intimidate staff, bend rules to get what he wanted. He always said he was protecting the system. But what he really protected was his position." Mark is shaking now. Real, visible shaking. His hands clutch the podium as if it's the only thing keeping him upright. "I fired you," he hisses. "You're bitter. You're lying." Her eyes glisten, but not with anger, with something closer to sadness. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here because I spent years enabling you, convincing myself your behavior was part of the job. But it wasn't. It was harmful, and it never stopped." The courtroom is silent except for Mark's ragged breathing. Judge Caprio nods slowly. "Thank you, ma'am. You may sit." She does, folding her hands in her lap, gaze fixed on the floor. The judge turns his attention back to Mark. "Your case started with a parking violation, but what I see now is a question of character. A man who believes he still carries authority he no longer holds. A man who refuses to accept boundaries." Mark's shoulders slump, not from exhaustion, but from the dawning understanding that he cannot command this room the way he once commanded board meetings and budget reviews. And for the first time, the courtroom witnesses something startling: the collapse of the persona he built to survive the fall from power. The courtroom feels different now, quieter, heavier, as though everyone is holding their breath at once. Mark stands motionless, eyes fixed on the desk in front of him. The aggressive posture that carried him through the first half of the hearing is gone. In its place is something unfamiliar on his face: uncertainty. Judge Caprio studies him with a kind of patient gravity. Not triumphant, not accusatory, simply present. "Mr. Drayton," the judge says softly, "before I consider the outcome of this matter, I need to ask you one more question. Mark doesn't look up. The judge continues. When you argued with the parking officers, when you used an old credential, when you insisted those rules didn't apply to you, did you do that because you believed your past position gave you exceptions others don't have? The words fall into the silence like a stone dropped into still water. Mark's jaw clenches. A long, trembling breath pushes through his chest. For a moment, he looks as if he might lash out again, reach for that familiar shield of indignation and authority. But something inside him falters. His voice, when it comes, is not the one he used earlier. It's thinner, stripped of its practiced confidence. Yes. A sharp stillness grips the room, the kind of silence that speaks louder than shouting ever could. He lifts his head slowly, eyes wet at the edges, not from tears, but from the strain of finally admitting something that undermines the foundation he has stood on for decades. I didn't want to be treated like everyone else, he continues. I spent my whole career being the one who enforced the rules. I thought I'd earned the right to step over a few. There's pain in the confession, but also a flicker of release, like a man exhaling after holding in something too long. Judge Caprio nods once, deeply. Thank you for your honesty. He doesn't smile. He doesn't frown. He just lets the moment sit. Then he speaks with quiet firmness. Mr. Drayton, let me tell you something. You didn't fall from power. The judge leans forward slightly. You fell into truth. The phrase lands with the weight of a verdict, though no sentence has been spoken. A gasp ripples across the benches, small, involuntary, as if the entire room felt the impact at the same time. Mark closes his eyes. His shoulders drop, loosening in a way they haven't since he entered the building. The words hit him harder than any formal reprimand. From the back row, his former assistant stands again, not to accuse him this time, but to soften the blow. I didn't come here to bury you, she says, voice trembling. I came because I hoped that maybe facing this would break the cycle. You weren't always like this. Mark's gaze lifts, surprised. You hoped that for me? She nods, tears brightening her eyes. I did. I still do. There's a rustle among the spectators, sympathy merging with astonishment. The courtroom, once tense and charged, now feels strangely tender. Mark swallows hard. I didn't know anyone wanted me to stop. I thought the only way to survive in government was to stay hard. His former assistant answers quietly. Hard isn't the same as cruel. Her words hang there, gentle and devastating. Judge Caprio leans back in his chair, absorbing the moment. His voice takes on the tone of a teacher addressing a room full of students, firm, reflective, yet compassionate. This court isn't designed to punish people when they stumble, he says. Its purpose is to remind them of who they are supposed to be. Somewhere along the way, Mr. Drayton, you lost balance. That happens to many who hold authority. Mark nods faintly. The judge closes the file. I will issue a decision, but I want you to understand something. The true verdict today isn't written on paper. It's written in whether you take this moment seriously. A hush settles in. Everyone in the room feels the weight of the turning point. The next words from the judge will determine the legal outcome, but the moral turning point has already happened. The judge lifts the file once more, though it's clear his decision has already formed. The room leans in. Even the hum of the old fluorescent light seems to quiet. Mr. Drayton, Judge Caprio begins, the statute sets your fine at $85. Mark braces himself, expecting more, expecting the hammer. But, the judge continues, I'm reducing it to $1. A ripple of disbelief passes through the courtroom. Not outrage, not approval, just surprise. Mark's eyes open wider, confusion and relief mingling in a single startled breath. Caprio isn't finished. However, he says, this isn't simply about a citation. You will return to this courtroom in 30 days and tell me, specifically, what you have done to contribute to the community you once served. Mark hesitates. Return? For what, exactly? The judge's expression softens, but his tone stays firm. To show me your path forward. A fine punishes a moment. Service reshapes a person. Murmurs sweep across the benches, older residents nodding slowly, some with approval, some with curiosity. It's not leniency they recognize, it's wisdom. Mark stares at the judge, completely unmoored. I don't understand why you'd give me that chance. Caprio clasps his hands. Because real accountability isn't about pushing someone down. It's about inviting them to stand correctly. The words leave Mark momentarily speechless. Then, from the side bench, his former assistant rises again. But this time, her posture carries none of the tremors from before. Her voice is steady. If you're willing, she says quietly, I'll help you find something meaningful to do. Food banks, veterans programs, literacy volunteers. There's plenty. Mark turns toward her, not with the arrogance he carried in earlier, but with something unfamiliar. Humility. You'd help me? He asks. She nods. Everyone deserves a chance to get it right. For a moment, the courtroom feels like a different place entirely. Not a chamber of judgment, but a room where a man's fate gently shifts back toward humanity. Mark clears his throat. Judge, I'll try. I don't know if I can change everything, but I can try. Caprio smiles, not broadly, but with the quiet approval of someone who has seen countless people walk into his courtroom, lost, and walk out a little more grounded. Then you've already begun, he replies. The judge taps his gavel lightly, more like a blessing than a command. Case continued pending review. As Mark gathers his folder, carefully this time, almost reverently, the courtroom remains silent. People watch him with a new mixture of curiosity and sympathy. At the doorway, he pauses. For the first time all morning, he turns back toward the bench. Thank you, he says. Not loudly, not confidently, just honestly. Judge Caprio inclines his head. Make good use of the month, Mr. Drayton. Mark steps out into the hallway, and the heavy door glides shut behind him. Only then does a soft, unexpected sound rise from the benches. Gentle applause, the kind reserved for moments that feel quietly true. It isn't celebratory. It isn't triumphant. It's the sound of people witnessing a man step, however uncertainly, toward redemption. And as the echo fades, the listener is left with the unmistakable aftertaste of Judge Caprio's courtroom. Justice, delivered not with force, but with wisdom, restraint, and uncommon humanity.